We have our guest speakers today, Ian Winters and Lanning Thompson. Ian is going to start out for us. Ian and I have known each other a very long time, actually. Ian is the longtime executive director of the Northern California Land Trust. And I served on that board for a number of years. He's going to tell us about the community land trust model, how it is unique in providing permanently affordable housing, and how it helps to promote affordable home ownership. So Ian, be my guest.
Okay, well, great. And let's see. So I guess I thought I'd probably take about 15-20 minutes and do a sort of very high level overview of what a CLT is and how it works and why it's an interesting thing to consider. Let me see if I can share my...
And let me interrupt for just a moment.
Yes.
If anyone has questions, please put them in the chat and we'll present them later. Thank you.
Let me get to my... Did I lose my... One second, I seem to have lost my... There's my... I have too many windows open. All right, so sort of informally sharing a little bit about what a CLT is. And also, for context, the Northern California Land Trust is a community land trust that, obviously Joanne was a longtime board member as well, based in Berkeley, but there are many, many community land trusts around the state and around the country and around the world. And one of the things, especially in America, that makes a community land trust unique is that it's an organization that is controlled by the community and by the residents and by relevant stakeholders in order to keep land in stewardship for community purposes and community uses. And the way that works is at sort of highest level, the board is made up of what's called a tripartite board. So 1/3 of the board being made up of residents of the community land trust, 1/3 from community members and stakeholders and other people who have to do with government and nonprofits and things like that. And then 1/3 of the people made up and representing the sort of typical skills and knowledge that you need on any sort of nonprofit board, especially one as complex as working with real estate in California. And how a CLT works is the really unique thing is that it owns the land under many projects. So a lot of people, I probably once a week get a call saying, oh, I have this community garden, or I have this sort of idea for a small affordable housing project or for a community business. I want to start a community land trust for it. It's a way to help support all of those things. But the idea is that there's a single CLT can support and steward land under many projects. So you might have one organization that it keeps the land affordable under a group of cooperative homes, under an arts and community space that helps develop, under community businesses and sort of business incubators, under an affordable condo development or affordable rental development, community gardens, many, many, many kinds of things. And that flexibility is one of the great things, that it's a way that the community can invest money in the land and help take it out of the speculative real estate market, yet have each individual homeowner be able to say, own their own home and have it be kept affordable. So beyond that, the other really important thing And, as we go into uncertain economic times again, is stewardship. And one of the big roles that a CLT plays, especially compared to other kinds of affordable housing ownership developments, is ongoing stewardship. So when we do a homeownership project, we're leasing the land to the homeowners. So we stay involved over time. And part of that involvement is ongoing support and touching base with the homeowners and really building the community. Like our residents are part of a community. And, when your community members are in difficulty, you want to be able to help them out. And so we're sort of there to be a backstop when there's issues. And, Joanne has been part of sometimes being part of that backstop and can tell you all sorts of stories. But, it can, I've twice in 20 years, and I'm just saw that there's a chat. Oh, yes, I can go onto the slideshow mode. I don't, there it is. Can people, there it is. So stewardship, one of the big things that can, any kind of ownership project, there's always things that come up. So what we're able to do is, because we're expecting a very modest ground lease check from our homeowners once a month or once a quarter, there's a little sign, if for some reason that doesn't happen, like there's a window to say, hey, are you doing okay? Is there something,
So after us talking it through, she goes, I thought originally.
Oh, okay. So for example, if someone gets into financial difficulty or has a family crisis, we're often able to step in and help get people mortgage assistance or rental assistance. Like, for example, during COVID, we helped start an emergency rental assistance program and an emergency mortgage relief program that was sort of part of lots of organizations statewide that did that. But we were able to help 70 of our homeowners and residents get emergency assistance, and 3,000 non-CLT residents. So this is what stewardship is: being able to help when there's an issue. And let's see, this is being a not very responsive. So hold on one second while I go back out of slideshow mode. So the computer's not being very happy about it. So I'll just have to go back and forth here. So what is the history of a CLT? Where did this idea come from? So there's a long history of shared community usage of land all around the world. It goes back to traditions in India, traditions in Native American cultures, all around the world. You see forms that are sort of hybrid forms of land ownership, where people own individual structures or buildings and have sort of rights of ownership, but there's also a community responsibility and also sort of community support. So in the US, a lot of the early forms and models came out of some of the community associations that developed. And okay, I'm seeing a question about money. I'll sort of speed through this and talk about the money, because yes, the money matters. And in the 50s and 60s, coming out of the civil rights movement, was really when the modern CLT form crystallized as a way to have community ownership of land and take it out of the speculative market, which what that means, here's my money slide. There's many sources of funds that go into developing a CLT project. So when you develop it up front, it's not any cheaper. I wish it were cheaper, but it's not any cheaper than developing a real estate project any other way. But what it does do over the long term is it helps maintain that investment in perpetuity. So instead of an investment where you subsidize someone's down payment and that money then gets lost and you have to do all that work again the next time that someone buys a house or the next time it turns over, the CLT, all this money that is raised from public-private investment pools, from owner equity, from organizational equity, community lenders. We also see, around 40% of a typical project comes in as subsidy or equity. And that's a combination of donations and bargain sales. Public investment, is usually 30 to 35, sometimes more percent. So for example, for NCLT, we get money from the Cow Home program and from other state affordable housing programs. We typically see a bunch of money come from local municipalities, from the county. We're also working a lot these days with bringing in green investment or energy efficient investment into housing so that that money can help also reduce the cost of operating the housing and doing climate adaptations. So the money comes from anywhere that almost anywhere that we can get it. We have never worked with eminent domain, and that's a complicated situation or a complicated discussion in the CLT world, I would say, is we're always looking to do projects that there's a clear community desire for the project, and that it's not exploiting someone in the process. And so sometimes eminent domain could be that, but I've oftentimes seen eminent domain used in challenging ways, or not always necessarily with all of the community in favor. And come on, go ahead. And so I will jump ahead a little bit here to talk about an example. Like, here's a real life example, our Mariposa Grove project that was to kind of ground this in like what happens and what the finance structure looks like. So this is what's called a limited equity condominium. So there's a project in North Oakland that's a 7-unit project where a group of community residents were living in this group of houses that were near each other and decided they wanted to create a co-housing community. And so the way that it came together is we purchased both the homes and the land upfront, in part from a bargain sale where the seller donated part of the value of the land to us. And then, working in collaboration with the residents, we subdivided it and sold each of the residents their individual unit as a condominium, and we retained the ground lease. And come on, go ahead and advance. There we go. This is set up, and this is just one example of the kinds of projects that you can do. So set up, we acquired the building in partnership with the residents, and at the end of the day, it became a limited equity condominium, which means that there's a limited return on what you can get. Come on. So, asking about funding, 60% of the money at the acquisition came from a conventional mortgage. 30% of it came from a loan from a community development financial institution, 5% from the residents, 5% from NCLT's equity, plus $750,000 of a donation. And then when we sold the units to the residents, 20% came from the state passed through NCLT's down payment fund, then 10% of basically crowdfunding for resident down payments and kind of some additional subsidy. And then 20% was this equity donation, and 60% was what the residents had paid with their mortgage. Come on. All right, we already kind of talked about that. Let's see. Where is there? So here's the, hopefully this will not be too technical, and let me know if it is. But so here's this is the slightly complicated but magic thing that a land trust does. Is so our homes are, the increase in price is tied to the increase in area median income, or how much a home, how much the income increases on a median basis in the area. So this project was started in 2009, and the date we did this math and there was a resale was in 2018. So the area median income went up roughly 36% over a decade. Over that time, come on, the real estate price went from $350,000 for a 2-bedroom unit to $745,000, which of course now seems like a bargain 4 years later, or 115%. So those units we were able to sell to people at $250,000 was what they ended up, basically paying. When they resold 10 years later, there's a 36% increase. So we allow the price that you sell your unit for to increase by the amount of the area median income. And so that resident was able to resell for $340,000. And this is someone who had never, ever owned a home before, was renting, is making $66,000 a year. And there was no chance they would ever be anything other than a renter. They had that home for a decade, and they built $90,000 in wealth. And in essence, in that same time frame, we also think about the community gain or community equity that is built. So the building was worth $350,000 in 2009. 2018, it was $745,000. That's a gain for the community of value that's been taken out of the speculative world of $300,000, over $300,000. So that's a little about how it works. There's our poster from 1973, which we're thinking about for the 50th anniversary getting reissued, because it's about that time. Let me just exit out of this so I can figure out where the other slides I wanted to jump ahead to were. I think I grabbed a slightly more complicated. All right, so that's my, I don't want to go into anything too terribly complicated. But so that's a quick overview of how how the CLT world works, and I can go into wildly more detail. But I know I'm not the only person on the meeting, and I think I'm here to just give a quick taster. Is that about the right amount of information, Joanne? I'm happy to like open up to questions or sort of launch into another section of the spiel.
Does anybody have any questions so far? In addition to what's been posted? I always like to talk about the permanent affordability aspect,
Yeah.
because that's really the unique thing about a CLT.
And I am looking for this. I thought that was in my set of slides, and where is it? So the biggest thing, as Joanne says, one of the most important things about a CLT is that it keeps land permanently affordable. And what that means is that if you buy a CLT home or you buy a CLT co-op, you get a great deal. And when you resell it, you get back what you paid for it times the increase in the area median income. So you're making a modest gain. Let's say, like those numbers, you paid $300,000 for a unit and you sell it 10 years later and you get a 35% appreciation. So you gain, $100,000. That seems like nothing compared to the $1 million gains people make in the Bay Area. On the other hand, you were able to purchase a house and you would have been a renter forever. Like you didn't have an opportunity to pay $1.7 million. And if you had the opportunity to pay $1.7 million, well, then you probably don't need community help to buy a place to live. And you've made a real gain to your household net assets that you otherwise would not have made. And most importantly, when you resell it, that's a unit, let's say you are selling it for $400,000. Can you imagine, buying a house, like a 3-bedroom house near Ashby Bart for $400,000 in central Berkeley? Like that's passing on an amazing deal to the next person. So that is how the sort of magic of the permanent affordability works. So, and the other half of it is that because that investment is embedded in the land, that money keeps recycling. So it goes in once. It doesn't go in every time you resell the unit. So like we have a unit near Ashby Bart that's a 3-bedroom, and the unholy amount of money of $25,000 was invested by the city of Berkeley in 1994. And I've seen some records that suggest that NCLT staff were pilloried at city council and told that they were, basically handing over obscene amounts of cash to some person to make this unit affordable, and what was being thought of. And not a single dollar of additional city money has gone into that home since then. And the last time it resold about 3 years ago was for $350,000 to a low-income family. And, no additional dollars since 1994. And that's a pretty amazing story. So, and Mark, I saw your question. Yes, that is the basis that anybody who purchases a unit, when they purchase it, they need to qualify as a low-income buyer. And, depending on the funding, sometimes we work with moderate income purchasers, so 110 or 120% of AMI. Most of the time, we're working with households that are below 80% or sometimes 65% AMI. It just depends on the funding source and the project and all of those kind of things. But the great thing is that, it means those people can purchase something and then they can pass it on to the next household at their income level, whenever they sell. Other questions, thoughts?
There's usually a question also, Ian, about whether this home can be inherited, passed on
Yes.
to family members.
So yes, that's part of the homes can be inherited and passed on. We've dealt with that a couple of times during my time at NCLT. And the one difference is if someone lives in the home or is a sort of first degree relative, then they automatically just, it's like any other inheritance, it becomes their home. If it's a second degree relative, and is usually passed on by funding sources, they inherit the home, but they have to qualify as a low-income homeowner. If they've never lived there, they've never expressed an interest in living there, and it's just they're inheriting it as an asset, then we, most cases, say that you should sell the home and you'll get the money, but there's not been any sort of dedication that says it's for them. And so we do, whenever people move out, we do a move out sort of interview, and there's a few people that we'll stayed in touch with. We don't really have a mechanism to like do a long-term follow-up with them, but there is a partnership with the California CLT network that we did last year, where they brought in a bunch of researchers from UC Berkeley and did a census and survey of every CLT resident across the state. And that there's a lot of great information about sort of how families build assets and how their income has changed over the time they've lived in land trust units and things like that. Other question about, are homes built by CLT or purchased? This is where every community land trust is really kind of unique. And so some CLTs build lots and lots and lots of homes directly. And there's a few that I know that even have their own construction companies. And I would say in California, most people either partner with developers or do a lot of acquisition rehab. So, just partly the market, that things are so expensive that at least in the Bay Area, we're usually doing acquisition and rehab.
Van?
Yeah, I'm a little unclear on the fact that, or what you were saying about keeping in touch with partners, home buyers. And I'm wondering if, there is some risk with regard to homes being maintained properly.
Well, so this is one of the things that the ground lease structure gives us a meaningful amount of leverage to help make sure that things are maintained. So there's a provision in the ground lease that says you have to, it doesn't say what color you need to paint it, but it says you need to, keep it basically well upkept. And if we do an annual inspection of each property and help, because most of our projects are condo associations, we help make sure that people do budgets and reserve studies and things like that. And we have a few times had to step in and not force someone to do maintenance, but strongly recommend and help arrange financing and funding for that.
And do they still have the training classes for prospective home buyers?
Yes, that is that is an important piece of becoming a homeowner, is that you go through a whole series of education classes, or given that many of our projects are co-op and condo projects at NCLT, it's also a process of helping develop the rules and norms for that condo association or cooperative, as well as being involved in the decision-making during the development process. And again, that part is part of what is specific to NCLT, but the new resident, new purchaser training and education, that is very standard across CLTs.
And Mark had a second question. If CLT builds the units, are they obligated to follow the prevailing wage?
That depends on the funding source. I would say 90% of our projects are prevailing wage projects. And the ones that aren't are ones where there's no government money going into it. And we're occasionally lucky enough that someone donates a home or does a bargain sale at a fraction of market rate. And so those we can do rehab and work with a conventional contractor.
Van?
Is there any effort being made to electrify homes that you're involved with, and not just build from scratch, but rehabilitate and, to basically make them greener?
There is. We've just part of our strategic plan that we just finished is to have our portfolio carbon neutral by 2030. So far this year, we've taken 3 projects almost totally electric, and we just got a $1 million award to start designing a mixed use sort of residential and office replacement for our office building that'll be totally off the grid, self-sustaining from the Energy Commission.
Great.
So there'll be news about that coming up soon.
All right. Any other questions? Okay. Well, Ian, thank you so much. That was a
You're
great
welcome.
overview, and maybe later on, if people have more questions, I can help with some answers. But I know it's late where you are. We don't want to keep you up.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, so it's starting to hit that point of like, wait, why is the slide not advancing? Oh, oh, it's the wrong key.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. And
Yes, nice to see all of you.
And we'll send you questions also later if people think of something they want to know.
Yeah, great. Oh, and I should also say there's lots of information and resources about CLTs at the California CLT Network site.
Okay.
I will just put that in the chat before I go. And so there's all sorts of interesting policy things afoot, and many more things than I could run through in half an hour. But yes,
Great.
And for full disclosure, I am one of the board members for the state network. So
Okay.
yes.
Well,
Right.
have fun in the
Well,
UK.
thank you, and have a good rest of your meeting.
All right. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Next we have Lanning Thompson. She's a longtime Livermore resident, and she has served on the Interfaith Housing in leadership roles. And she's going to talk to us about the nuts and bolts of affordable housing project process, from securing funding to managing the properties. It'll probably be quite different from what Ian just demonstrated for us, but it'll be interesting. Lanning?
Hello. First, I want to apologize for sounding kind of like a duck. I've had a cold or allergies for about a week. It went away, it came back. Anyway, I'll do my best. I also want to say that I'm going to focus a little bit more on the general state of affordable housing and the sources of the housing crisis in California, because I think they are not well known. It's part of the American dream to own your own house. But as Ian has explained, that dream has become unattainable for most residents of the Bay Area. Let's see how we compare to major metropolitan areas around the world. According to a recent study, San Francisco and San Jose are among the least affordable cities for home buyers in the whole world. That study compared the city's median household income with median house price. In the San Francisco area, which included Alameda County, the median home price of $1.53 million exceeded median income of $119,136 by a multiple of 11.8. Out of 92 high-priced housing markets in 8 countries, the San Francisco area ranked 86th. San Jose was in 89th place at the bottom, with a median multiple of 12.6. Los Angeles and San Diego also ranked high, so our state has the most severely unaffordable housing markets in the entire US. The study concludes that inequality, poverty, and overcrowding seem likely to worsen since housing markets like those in California are becoming more and more unaffordable. This means that the need for rental housing as well as subsidized housing will greatly increase. How did our area end up being the poster child for the housing crisis? One of the main factors is that job creation has greatly exceeded housing construction. For example, from 2010 through early 2022, California employers added 3.1 million more workers, but its builders filed permits for only 1.1 million new housing units. So 2 million fewer homes were created than workers hired. Another factor is the dearth of rental apartments, the go-to homes for people with low-paying jobs or even young adults just starting out on their future lives. Market rate developers prefer to build high-end single-family homes because the higher the sales price, the greater their profits. So they build houses that only high-income people can afford. The end result is that California's average home price is $818,260, twice the national average, and we have the nation's highest rental rates as well. Excuse me. Home ownership is especially difficult for many populations, such as single mothers, people of color, and senior retirees. My husband and I are retired freelance writers and editors. One reason we were able to buy our median priced house in 2006 is that it is the 8th house I have owned. In the early 70s, my parents loaned me money to buy a small house in Pennsylvania, And over the last 50 years, I, or my husband and I, have amassed a fair amount of equity, which enables us to have a low mortgage payment. We, along with other seniors who are able to live in houses they bought decades ago, are unusually fortunate. But people in their 30s and 40s have a hard time entering the local housing markets these days, even when they have advanced degrees and good jobs at the lab. They can't begin to build equity because they are forced to rent, and some just give up and move away. People who were born and raised here in Livermore can't afford to live here. There are several programs that help moderate and lower income people purchase houses, in addition to the wonderful one that Ian was describing. Market rate developers of single family home projects are required to make a certain percentage of those homes affordable or pay fees to the city in lieu of actually building those homes. I think Livermore currently requires that 15% of the total number of homes in a new development be sold at lower prices to qualified lower income buyers who can work with the city housing division to purchase them. These houses can only be resold to other lower income families. Most developers don't like to build them because they feel they still lose money on those houses that maybe don't have such fancy fittings on the interior. They often prefer to just pay the city's in lieu fees, which go into its funds for construction of additional affordable housing. Those per unit fees may no longer be equivalent to the actual costs of building an affordable apartment, though. A number of other nonprofits, such as Habitat for Humanity and Ian's Community Land Trust, have programs that help lower income families acquire houses they can afford. Still, owning a home isn't for everybody. For instance, some people may know they're only going to be in the area a few years, or others may be simply unprepared for the considerable responsibilities of home ownership. Currently, about 40% of Californians live in rentals, and there's a huge demand. But almost no apartment buildings have been built in the East Bay in the last 30 years. Historically, that's due to city ordinances that were intended to preserve quality of local single-family neighborhoods. Those ordinances might, for instance, restrict building heights or require really large parking lots, but their aim was to make it unpractical or unprofitable for developers to build multifamily housing. Other factors can include urban growth boundaries or restrictive environmental reports, both of which make good sense in principle, but they have their consequences. The shortage of available apartments has caused rents to rise astronomically, and that can especially affect people of color. It's hard to quantify the actual need for affordable rentals. My nonprofit organization, Interfaith Housing, has 3 senior communities with a total of 207 one-bedroom apartments in Livermore. I can't point to our 3 wait lists to show the demand because they've been closed since November 2018. The several hundred applicants who remain on our existing lists have been waiting for an apartment since well before that time, and most will have to wait another year before they get one. The wait list may be reopened when they get down to maybe a few dozen applications, but even then, a list may be open only for a brief 2-week period. I'm familiar with about 8 nonprofit affordable housing developers, such as Eden Housing, who build apartment communities in our area. Most of them manage the properties they've constructed. Interfaith Housing's current property managers, Satellite Affordable Housing Associates, SAHA, own or manage some 70 other family and senior properties in Northern California. and only one of them currently has an open wait list. People who desperately need housing can only put their names on a list to be notified if any of the properties are opening their list and accepting applications. When a list does open or a new property is built, Saha may get hundreds or even thousands of applications for a relatively few vacant apartments. This is the case with most other affordable developers. Mid-Penn, for instance, was swamped with applications for their Chestnut Square senior and family projects in Livermore. The Livermore Housing Authority owns affordable rentals, and it also provides Section 8 housing vouchers to residents seeking housing. However, these days, a voucher can be just a hunting license to find a landlord who will accept the HUD rent subsidies. Sadly, very few landlords do. I'll insert a brief warning here. Affordable housing, or AH as I say, involves lots and lots of acronyms. As you may know, the US Department of Housing and Urban Development is known as HUD, for instance. The state government has long been aware of the need to build more affordable housing. Excuse me. Way back in 1969, the state mandated that all California cities, towns, and counties plan for the housing needs of their residents, regardless of income. This state mandate is called the Housing Element and Regional Housing Needs Allocation, or RHNA, pronounced RHNA, and it delineates the amount and type of housing that each community should build. As part of the RHNA, the California Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, determines the total number of new homes the Bay Area needs to build and how affordable these homes need to be in order to meet the needs of people at all income levels. The Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG, works with a state committee to distribute a share of the region's housing needs to each city, town, and country in the region. Each local government must then update the housing element of its general plan to show the locations where housing can be built and the policies and strategies necessary to meet the community's needs. We get a new RHNA from ABAG every 8 years, and we're about to start on a new cycle that will end in 2031. As you may know, a committee is currently shaping a new Livermore general plan that will be in force from 2023 to 2045. And the city just released a draft of its new housing element, a key part of that general plan. Livermore's RHNA indicates how many homes the city should aim to build for each of 4 income categories that are based on the area median income, AMI. These categories range from very low to above moderate. The city government isn't required to build all the needed housing itself, but it's supposed to consider its housing element when it's approving new projects. Since market rate developers don't want to build in inexpensive homes, they count on nonprofit developers and grassroots organizations such as Interfaith Housing to build them. Pleasanton and Dublin also have large new RHNAs. Of the 3 cities, Dublin has built the most affordable housing. Livermore comes next, and Pleasanton has hardly built any. Over the years, all 3 cities have built way more than their share of houses for affluent people. So for the upcoming RHNA cycle, ABAG has determined that Livermore's share of the region housing needs is 4,570 new units, either houses or apartments. The city has already determined that we have the space to build more than that number. In the past, not much happened when a city such as Pleasanton neglected to build affordable housing. But new legislation has given the RENA some teeth. If a city cannot demonstrate that it is actively trying to get its share of new housing built, it can be sued by the state or required to build high-rise apartment towers near transit hubs. I'm just gonna take another sip. I have been president or vice president of Interfaith Housing, IFH, for most of the last 8 years. IFH, a coalition of 8 local faith organizations, was incorporated in 1968 and has built 3 complexes, Hillcrest Gardens, Vineyard Village, and Arbor Vista, for low-income seniors in Livermore. The rents are subsidized by HUD so that qualified tenants pay no more than 30% of their incomes. Applicants must be at least 62 and be able to prove that their incomes don't exceed $40,700 for an individual or $46,500 for a couple. Most of our residents have already retired or earn very little income. Many have to live off their Social Security payments. There is no way they can afford the market rate rent of a 1-bedroom apartment in Livermore, which currently starts around $1,500 a month. Since there's been so much demand for our apartments, we are currently in the process of building a 4th complex at the end of Pacific Avenue and expanding Arbor Vista into adjacent vacant land. Here's the story behind our Pacific Avenue project. In 2017, the city's Housing and Human Services manager told IFH that the city owned a parcel of land situated in between our Vineyard Village and Arbor Vista communities, and it seemed ideal for another senior apartment complex. That land, which is adjacent to the skateboard park, had been vacant for decades because the city thought the Parks Department owned it. However, the parcel was actually part of the original site of the Livermore Rodeo, which had been donated by the Livermore Stockmen's Rodeo Association to the city in 1962 for the creation of our Civic Center, which now includes our City Hall, Police Department, Civic Center, Library, and the new council chambers. The 1962 land donation agreement between the Stockmen and the city specified that the rodeo be moved to another site, which was Robertson Park, ultimately, and the whole area had to be used for public purposes. It also stipulated that the 33 acres had to include a, quote, large central park and recreational facility, unquote, as well as a memorial to local veterans. Senior apartment buildings aren't public projects, so the Rodeo Association had to agree to using this last remaining parcel of their land donation for that use. In July 2017, I was able to arrange a meeting between members of the IFH board, the Stockman's board, and city council then officers John Marchand and Bob Warner at our Arbor Vista complex. Longtime Rodeo Association member Don Stasis said they didn't have a problem with senior housing, but the Central Park and Veterans Memorial promised in the 1962 agreement had never been built. And the lot in question was the last vacant parcel in the Civic Center. Bob Warner noted that the city was planning a park in the downtown redevelopment area and that it could be designated as Stockman's Park to fulfill the 1962 agreement. The Stockman agreed to a sort of land swap and permitted the city to build affordable housing on the lot at the end of Pacific Avenue. After the parcel was made available in December 2017, Interfaith Housing partnered with Saha, an AH developer, to respond to the city's subsequent requests for proposals to develop the site. And we were selected as the developers in early 2018. Since that time, we have been working with architects to create a specific plan and design to build 140 apartments in 2 phases. Our project has been approved by the City Planning Commission, and we have received a development disposition and loan agreement, known as a DDLA, from the City Council. And the city will lease the land to us for a token fee. Saha's development division is now amassing construction funding from various sources. Now, IFH's 3 existing communities were constructed with HUD mortgages, but HUD no longer provides mortgages for new affordable housing projects. And while the city will contribute about $7 million from its developer fees to our project, and we'll also receive grants from the county's Measure A1 funds, the bulk of construction funding now comes from the complicated and highly competitive federal tax credit program, in which large for-profit companies underwrite AH projects in return for reductions to corporate taxes. The tax credits, sorry. That didn't work. The tax credits received by the corporations are awarded by a state committee to the housing projects that serve the neediest tenants. For instance, Eden Housing, another nonprofit developer, added apartments for larger families and adjusted the income levels for its downtown project from moderate to lower income to improve its likelihood of securing the tax credits needed to build their 130 unit complex. IFH is preparing IFH and Saha are preparing our applications for the next round of tax credit distributions. And if we are successful in receiving the amounts we need, we may be able to break ground in 2023, some 6 years after our initial efforts. And maybe we can start leasing out apartments in 2025. The city's working name for our project is Pacific Avenue Senior Apartments, but we are working on a more descriptive name. Suggestions are welcome, as are any questions. Thank you. You're muted.
Questions? No questions? Well, Lanny, you gave such a complete presentation. You didn't leave anything for questions.
I will just jump in really quickly and say I really appreciate Lanny's clear and very complete description of what's going on. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
You're very welcome.
Van?
Yeah, I'm curious about your familiarity with the housing element that's being proposed, and if you have any perspectives on how Livermore is attempting to address the housing needs.
It's like a 200-page, the draft document, and I have waited partway through, but perhaps Trish could answer that question more easily than I could.
I'm in the same boat with you. It was a big document.
I didn't make it through.
So Van, I'm sorry, there was some noise in the background. Could you repeat the question?
I'm just curious.
At my end, not yours, just to be clear.
Oh.
So
curious about your perspective on the housing element, whether it actually is serving Livermore's needs, and even going beyond the state requirements for housing.
It's a big question. I think that let's get through the elements that you know what we have. We're pretty happy with what we were given. The big problem with RHNA numbers in general is getting the low income filled. Just one real quick correction: city doesn't build, the city approves you know the ability for others to build. And so making it cost out at the at the low end is hard. Which is why I was really excited by the land trust, the combination of these two speakers, for this. So with regard to the RHNA numbers, we were actually the only city of the 5 that did not protest the RHNA numbers in one way or another. Could we do more? Sure, I'm sure we could. But it's actually very difficult to just get those numbers done. As I think you may be aware, we've just gotten the first approval for, this past city council meeting, we got the first developers coming in for the Isabel project, which is a good portion of what we're looking for. That's really good development coming in there. So, that's exciting. I'm actually much more concerned about, with regard to RHNA numbers, is the regional piece of this. And so this is a slightly different topic. I'm just going to mention it since it is a slightly different topic, and that is the effect of, it's regional, the regional matters. And so I'm happy to do what we can do, and I'm happy that we are doing what we're doing. But I'm also concerned that that isn't necessarily the case everywhere. And so ensuring that not only our surrounding cities, but cities in other parts of the Bay Area and around the state are dealing with this as well is important. I'm not sure I've answered the question. I mean, do you want to push me on that more? I don't mean
I'm also curious about transit, densities near transit, and I think the Isabel project is going to go a long way in facilitating that. But what other parts of the city, or what other improvements to our transit system could we expect?
Well, so as you know, we're working on Valley Link. And, so as Valley Link comes in and links us to the, over the hill, that is going to produce 2 different transit hubs. But we need to get that first. So the Isabel is the one that is, sort of been fleshed out, and we're in the process of making work. There's another one that's up. It's not Greenville. It's like in between Greenville and Vasco. I'd have to look at the map. But it's in that area, and I'm sorry, but you're now getting my spatial. I don't do directions very well.
It's between Trish. It's between Nabasco and First Street.
Thank you. Yeah.
Eastbound,
And it's on the south side of the freeway. Is that, Mel? Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, that's correct. So
Yeah.
I'm with the General Plan Advisory Board. And that's correct. So it's between First Street and Vasco eastbound will be the other Valley Link station.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Isabel one is a great model for this upcoming one, because it's really well thought out. The layout is very well done.
It was just being started. The Isabel one was just being approved by City Council right after I got on council. And it was just like, this is what we should be aiming for. So those 2 areas would be the TOT. But I think there's other things we can do. I noticed that, we still face these problems of, we've got good affordable housing projects coming in, Eden Housing specifically. And, the ability to get that built we're being stymied. Let's just be, so.
Mark, do you want to chime in here?
Who's asking?
Me, Joanne.
Well, first off, I guess I'd like to express my appreciation for Lanny's presentation. There were some key points that I thought were, I don't think they can be overemphasized. And one is, it's really hard to tell what the demand is for the affordable housing, because those waiting lists that she talked about, that's the common thread everywhere. We have waiting lists for Section 8. We have waiting lists for the Leahy Square, and they're open for. They haven't been open for years, and there's a backlog of people who are still hoping to get in there, and it's really a crapshoot whether or not they'll make it. So there's a huge demand, and I also want to say something else about we say affordable housing. Affordable housing is not cheap. Affordable housing, actually, if it's funded by the US government, is almost double the cost of what it would cost a commercial developer to put in housing, whether it's apartment complexes or houses or the like. And I'll give you an example. I was shocked at this. And I think we've mostly of us have probably heard some of the names. There's a company called Abode. It's a great nonprofit. It's over in Fremont. They're going to be building 300 micro houses, if you will, 125 micro houses that are 300 square feet each. The cost for doing that is $45 million. That's $1,200 per square foot. That's $360,000 for each 300 square foot unit. And those are only possible because of taxpayer money. The complicated algorithm that Lanny was talking about, I think about 80% of new affordable housing is paid for by those tax credits. And the other 10% is from things like regional, like in Alameda County, we have Measure A, which is helping out with the Pacific Avenue that Lanny mentioned, and also at the Eden Housing downtown and the Vineyard. They actually Livermore scored a trifecta about a year ago when they got all the money that was awarded by Alameda County for affordable housing projects. And that's very, very unusual. But anyway, so it's a tough business. And it takes, lining up all the money probably adds 2 years, at least 1 to 2 years, to any project that you're going to do. It's very challenging. So I'm not sure if that was the kind of comment you were asking for or looking for, but
Yeah.
Can you clarify why the rate is so high for affordable housing? $1,200 a square foot.
So I'm going to say a good portion of it is the result of the law of unintended consequences. If you're using federal money to build any of these things, you have to do what's called prevailing wage. And while most contractors, commercial contractors, pay prevailing wage, or I'll say competitive wages, they don't have to do the kind of record keeping and submitting all that information to the agencies. And the estimate is that adds something like, well, I think that it comes close to adding at least 70% to the cost structure.
That's unbelievable.
Yeah,
It's incredible, but
it's a huge factor.
It's a huge factor. I mean, and for instance, we're just getting a loan right now from Fremont Bank to do a major facelift on Bluebell, apartments at Bluebell, which has been overdue for a long time. And it's taken us probably 3 years or 4 years now since I joined the Housing Authority Board to figure out a way to generate the cash flow so that we can qualify for that loan. And I'm counting on getting about 50 cents on the dollar effectiveness for doing the repairs and the refurbishment that we really need there. And the sad thing is that the people that are in the greatest need will be served the least for that cost structure, right? Because that $1.8 million is only going to go so far, and then we're going to have to figure out another way to fund whatever else is needed.
I want to add a couple of things about what the city's trying to do. As far as I know, they are focusing on infill. So they're identifying various properties around the town that would work for affordable housing. And for instance, we've been urged by the city housing department to consider adding higher stories to our existing communities, which are all one-story apartment clusters. So to build up, not high rises. And by the way, a 4-story building is still considered low rise, but we could increase our buildings by a few stories and get in a lot more apartments. But as Mark mentioned, a huge issue is not only the construction funding, but the operating costs, the cash flow. Once you lease out a building, because HUD no longer actually subsidizes new projects either. So you have to include a mix of income levels sometimes, so some tenants can pay enough to balance out the ones who can't pay much, since they're only paying 30% of their income. And if they have virtually no income, then they pay virtually nothing. And it's very hard to maintain the building and everything else on very meager cash flow margins.
Anybody else?
Let me suggest to Lanny. I think, Lanny, that is an excellent idea where if you're building multi-unit facilities, to have a mix where some of the people are paying market rate and others are being subsidized based on for those. And that's what basically that's what we have now at Bluebell. And those people that are paying on the market rate units, that's where the cash flow is coming from to qualify for that loan that we'll be able to retire. Without that, we'd be in a zero cash flow situation, and the building would eventually just fall down. It's pretty sad.
Well, our prospective tenants wouldn't necessarily be able to do market rate rents, but they will be more moderate. They will have more moderate incomes than the very low or previously homeless tenants, and be able to pay at least somewhat more, though it may not be equivalent to a market rate rent. But thank you.
Stephen?
Hi, everybody. As someone who has spent the last 72 hours looking at that 200-page draft of the Livermore housing element, let me give you a little brief overview of what the housing element is segmented as. There's the first part of it is there's an executive summary, which is the whole thing. There's a lot of pages about our current demographics and what our needs are. How many are seniors? How many are students? Where in the city are those demographics located statistically? There's a lot of pages, so we have a lot of census data in there. After that, there's a segment about policies. So there's, what can the city do? What is in our power to help with? And what is, it's a work plan for staff, because not all of this will happen at once. It'll happen over a series of years. So it's, by 2025, we will analyze X, or we will consider Y, or we will rezone, or, it's a work plan. And then the third part of it is actually what's known as the sites inventory. So that's the actual list of where the housing is going to go. And it's by parcel number. So they don't really give you a direct address, because some of it's just empty lot. So you need a parcel number. And that's saying, we think that a development could go here and be this size. And so they add up all those numbers and say, okay, we think we can fit this many units in all of those developments. And they have to account for stuff like whether there's something already there. Like if there's already an office building there, how much does that get in the way of it being turned into affordable housing later? So they kind of have to account for that. So those are kind of the three main issues. None of them are perfect, but there's a lot of good work in here that is a starting point for conversation. So.
Anyone else?
Do you think there's any way to restrict corporate purchases of property? Restrict the ownership to people who are actually going to live in the homes?
Well, there was one law that was passed, and the land trust has been able to help take advantage of that, and that is the foreclosures. The residents, the renters in a property that's being foreclosed has an opportunity to match the bid. And if they can match the bid, then they can buy the property as opposed to a corporate purchaser, because there are a lot of these big corporations that go around snatching up foreclosure properties. And we were, I actually participated in it. We were able to help a resident qualify and purchase the unit that was being foreclosed on. So that's one way, but you have to find.
I can't add to that, so thank you.
I think it would take some creative legislation to limit that kind of bulk purchasing.
When the houses are sold at auction, say, is that what happens?
Yeah. Very often. And there are some particularly notorious companies do it.
And then often the houses end up sitting vacant anyway.
Yeah. True. Well, I think this has been a really good discussion. I've learned a lot. Thank you, Lanny and Mark. Yes, yes. So in closing, I just want to remind everybody that there is a forum, the Pathways to Peace Forum, that's happening starting at 4 o'clock at the Asbury United Methodist Church. And there are going to be some wonderful speakers. Let me see if I can share my screen. Here we go. There's the information. And you can watch live on YouTube with the QR code.
I just added the link in the chat.
Oh, good, thank you. Oh, great. Okay, so thank you all for coming and participating. It's been really rewarding. And we'll see you at our next meeting next month. Thank you.
Well, thank you